To get this as your skiza tune, KTN, your home.
Some of the road. There was a lot of online chatter yesterday, and one of the things before I actually get into one or two things here was, did you watch the videos of quite a number of Gen Zs who are saying goodbye to their parents?
Yeah.
Did you guys see that?
Very sad to see.
Very sad.
Getting to the point where somebody is leaving their last message to their mom, leaving the last message to their dad. That's where we've reached. And you know, for us, you look at all this and you wonder, how did we even get here? So you have a lot of young people who are talking about, this is how I want my body preserved if I die. So they are sending a message to the morticians. I want my body to be preserved this way. And we may take it as a joke. It's online chatter. It's just conversations going on with these young people. But they're serious.
Yeah.
They're saying they're ready to die in case that's what they're going to face. But majority of them are not necessarily violent. But we know in any protest, you'll find different groupings. So you have the police who have to maintain law and order. You have peaceful protesters. You also have people who want to infiltrate the protest, take advantage, steal from people, cause chaos like what we saw last Tuesday. However, just to keep it peaceful and to keep it clear, it's important as a person who's going to the streets to remember these things. And I repeat, because I've gone through this training myself. Safety is very, very important. And you need to look and watch out for each other. Like I said, avoid flashy clothes or things that really, really stand out. Wear solid shoes, running shoes or boots for easy movement. Protective gear, if possible, bring your own goggles, bring this because of the tear gas, use a scarf or a mask to filter the tear gas. No jewelry or loose accessories. If you're running and somebody wants to grab you, it's easy to do that when you're wearing chains and that sort of thing. Now, in terms of staying connected, because people disappear, it's important to have a fully charged phone. If you can't carry a power bank, carry a power bank. In terms of now turning off your face or fingerprint on your phone, it's so important. Use a password in case something happens to you. Turn off face and fingerprints. Then share your live location. This is extremely important. Share your live location with someone you trust who's not at the protest. That way, if you disappear to some corner or you are lost, people can trace you. Now, number 3, stick together. Join with a friend or a group. Never protest alone. And agree where you're going in case you're separated, like a meeting point. In case you're separated, this is going to be a meeting point. Now, appoint someone as your group observer or someone who's going to record the group just in case something again happens. Staying alert is very important. Know the signs of infiltration or any escalation. Watch for people urging violence or destruction. There might be goons sent to incite chaos. Don't follow crowds blindly. Always know your exit route. So always watch out. If something happens, how do I get out of this situation? Stay away from trapped areas. Don't confront police officers. Very important. Don't confront them. Don't antagonize. Then know what to do in dangerous situation. Now, here's where I want to insist on something. It's important in terms of your essential pack. Carry your water. I repeat, carry your own water. Don't drink water from somebody you just don't know. Unless you're going to a direct shop that is open, don't get water from somebody you don't know outside your group. Don't receive water from a stranger and just drink it. I repeat, carry your own water. If you can carry snacks or energy bars, very, very important. If you can carry some loose cash, not carrying money, not having money on your mobile phone, some just loose cash, stack that money somewhere in case you need to use that money. But like I said, in terms of eating, don't accept food from strangers, that people you don't know, unless your group identifies those people, or drink water from strangers.
True. Very important.
Important things to take into consideration this morning. And also at this point, Reverend Tom Otieno is here and he's in the hot seat this morning. The Director of Missions at All Saints Cathedral joins us for this conversation at this hour. Reverend Tom, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
Very well indeed. Yourself?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
You being here at this time also means that you couldn't be here earlier because certain roads were blocked and you couldn't come into the city.
That is correct.
Forms the basis of a conversation that we get into this morning because it is the reasons as to why this is happening at this time.
Yes.
We'll start things off as we normally do. Dennis shares a proverb and we're in a different country this week. He's going to share the proverb. We'd like to get your interpretation of that proverb, Reverend Tom, before we get into this conversation and to hear what that would be.
Yes, so good morning, Reverend.
Good morning.
The proverb today comes from Ethiopia. Kenya and Ethiopia are act nemesis when it comes to long distance running. We always want to see who's outshining the other.
Yes.
And being a patriot, I'd say Kenya, we are doing well. We're doing well. But a lot more that comes from that country. It's never been colonized, you know. They fought the Italians who tried to colonize them. But our proverb today speaks to how we build houses and how we should be ready. And it's all about a house can't be built for the rainy season only. A house can't be built for the rainy season only. How would you interpret that?
That house is basically an all-weather structure that is meant to take care of the whole of the journey of life. If you build only for rain, then you don't take care of the sun, you don't take care of the cold, you don't take care of the wind, and your house basically will not be habitable in those other seasons. Which is to say, wisdom of it is that you need to be an all-round kind of person. You need to be fully developed in all areas to be able to engage effectively, appropriately, and efficiently in all the issues of life.
Yeah. Well put.
Wow. Definitely well put. A year ago, things took a different turn, whereby there was overt, multiple, repetitive demand for change when it came to governance and a different pivot for leadership. And that was in the anti-finance bill protest that took place. It wasn't just against the finance bill. From what we've seen, that it was Kenyans and they were crying. Kenyans were crying for change. Kenyans were crying for things to be done differently. And it was a consolidation of messages that we heard from different places over time, but it seemed to all be in one place at one time. Now here we are a year later, and we're on this day looking at a time where the call is renewed. It's still the same message. It's a renewed call, and this has come after violence. This has come after death. And a week, just on Sunday, we saw interdenominational meeting of churches at the All Saints Cathedral, where it was to pray for Kenya and then to also ask again for the protection of Kenyans, but then also to reiterate the voice whereby it was said that things needed to be done right. We've heard your voice often, but then also people have said, what's the voice of the church or religious groups, organization when it comes to this? And so 1 year later, Reverend Tom, and where we are today, what change have we seen and what's the cry still?
The cry is for a new constitutional and governance order where the constitution is in place, but the implementation thereof is wanting in several aspects. But there's also the governance and politics and policies that come from that. And the cry, of course, is basically detonated by the high cost of living. It's detonated by injustice by the police. It's detonated by, basically unemployment. But how we cascade there is that we did not take care of certain things going downhill. Because this is not where it all began. It all began President Kibaki trying to rescue and doing a very good job at it. But certain decisions in the succeeding regime being made that weren't felt then, but cascaded to where we are with the current president, who, when he took over, with the resolve he had to try and solve things, rushed things without necessarily carrying Kenyans on board. And secondly, did not listen to the cry of Kenyans in trying to resolve those things. So the reason given for taxation was raise revenue to pay the debt, which debt he did not incur. But of course, there have been other debts which he has incurred. So he cannot totally run away from that. So it's been a long, downhill slide for the country. And the attempts to resolve that are what have produced frequent clashes and frequent conflict. Because there was Mandamano in 22, there was Mandamano in 23. And I think what made last year very potent was that this time the young people took over the cry. Before then it was politicians, the opposition, basically Raila Odinga and company, who are pressing for electoral reforms and also Sufuria movement, which was basically the same cry.
Yeah.
But the young people gave it renewed energy and renewed vigor. Our response as religious leaders was slow and muted initially, because I think we were taken aback by what happened and we sort of did not know how to respond. There were elements of response, but it was not coordinated. So the voice got muted and got buried in all those things. And the young people started asking, do these guys still exist?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Where are they?
And I remember some of us, like myself and a few of us who work with young people, were very vocal. But because we don't occupy pinnacle positions, you don't necessarily get given the platform to respond as a first responder on behalf of the church. So there were voices, all right, but they were muted. They were down there. So the coordinated response came after the hue and cry that says, where is the church? And so the top leadership of the church was stung and began to respond, albeit in very uncoordinated ways. But I think now the coordination that we are receiving and the message we are receiving, and especially if you want to peg it on what message we received from All Saints last Sunday, is basically that the church is with the people. And even yesterday, the KCCB, the message that they gave, the church is with the people, the church sympathizes with the people, but the church also offers some cautions to both parties. And the cautions to both parties are, on the part of the police as key players in demonstrations, there must be restraint, and they must stick to the Constitution in managing the demonstrations. So no need for use of live bullets, no need for that. And the message to the demonstrators themselves is basically, you must demonstrate according to the law. You cannot start, poking your fingers and at policemen's noses and throwing stones at them. So basically calling for responsibility on both sides. That command must take responsibility in terms of the police, but also demonstrators and their leaders must take responsibility and agree with the police on how to manage that space. Because what we want is an outcome where picketing is not turned into violence, which is what we have seen, the killings and what. Because they're only going to get worse if they keep happening.
Reverend, you've mentioned the need for going back to constitutionalism and the respect and rule of law.
Yeah.
And we talk about what happened in 2024, and today we're talking about 60 that died during the protest. We talk about extra 20 that have died in police cells, police brutality that we continue to see. Combine that with the political undertones that you continue to hear, and it appears as though, like we were speaking in the morning, it is us versus them. No one, in terms of from the leadership side, is sitting down to listen to the hue and cry that is being sent out there that deserves to be heard and addressed. And as today we mark 1 year since June 25th, one asked the difficult question, just how sure are Kenyans today, that they will get out there and they will see rule of law from both sides, that police will protect the citizens, that we will not see death? What guarantees and assurances are there?
There are no guarantees, in my own view, and that may sound pessimistic. But as far as I'm concerned, there are no guarantees, because if both sides do not change their mentality of engagement, the rules are there.
Yeah.
And I think, in the best of my understanding, both sides are very familiar with the rules.
Yes.
They know what should happen in that space. However, the points of departure are when both sides taunt each other, and then people lose patience, and stones are thrown, bullets are fired. That's what we really need to address. How can we manage this space without breaking it down? Okay? Do we always blame the police? Do we always blame the young people? Who takes responsibility? I think both do, because the environment is defined. The environment, the space of picketing is very clearly defined by the Constitution. So if there is a situation where people are peaceful, and there have been, and the police have antagonized the people, and there have been, the police take responsibility. If there's a situation where the police are peaceful and the young people come at them, then the young people take responsibility. Okay? So I think there has to be a very clear change of culture in the way that demos are managed on both sides. Right now, the narrative has been against the police, and I agree that they have done wrong. What I haven't heard, even from the statements that were made, by the 12 ambassadors and by the KCCB and even by the church, what I haven't heard is, what is the role of young people in the breakdown of that space? And so, because justice cuts both ways, you have to have a situation where that is addressed from both sides. It is easy to listen to activists and take their side. It is very easy to ignore what the police say, because yes, there has been situations where police have taken us for granted, and they have insulted our intelligence with their attempt to cover up. But are there legit situations? So we must go back to that. Where does it break down? Okay, and examine every situation in its own right, and not do a blanket, So, for instance, what happened to Rex, I am glad there is an inquest going on. There should be more inquests to find out, why did people get killed? Those who have disappeared, those are inquests. So treat every situation in its own right, because the space is defined. And the space is secured for everybody constitutionally. So why it breaks down cannot be a blanket opinion.
But Reverend Tom, the history of this country, when we talk about inquests, is we know how prolonged they can stretch.
Yeah.
And also our culture of, being very forgetful.
Yeah.
Don't you think we should actually have prosecutions more than inquests? Because when MP Were was murdered, it didn't take 1 week, meaning 7 days. Within a space of 4 days, CCTV cameras were availed. We were given a blow-by-blow account, minute by minute, of what happened. The suspects were apprehended on the 4th day. And we know what has happened to the case. Now, you look at the case of Albert Ojwang, for example. We're looking at the cases from last year, because all these families going out to the streets, all the executions that are carried out by the police, still not a single officer has been held to account. Instead, we talk about the inquest of Rex. Well, that might seem to be giving some glimmer of hope. Don't you think we need to go beyond that?
We should. And I totally agree with you. We should. One then has to provide what you call the legal apparatus for that. Because in the shooting of Rex, for instance, if you've been following the inquest and the evidence adduced, it is very easy for the police to walk away from that because it was done without cameras. There were no focused cameras, and there was no what you call, limited space for one to be able to even take raw footage with their phone. Everybody was running. So a bullet flies and hits him on the thigh. I don't know why nobody took footage, and I don't know why they cannot find CCTV from the city, strategic cameras. So that's why I'm saying every situation must be examined in its own right. There were those which happened in the glare of the camera. Those needs to go straight to prosecution. There are those that happened in extraneous situations where you cannot find any evidence to tie anyone down. You cannot treat those the same as, the ones that are very clear-cut. So clear-cut ones, surely, take them to court. Hold that person accountable. And, let's not be conversing about that because it's straight. But the ones which are blurred, there are some which are blurred, like Rex is really blurred. And somebody must be held to account. You just have to ask yourself legally, who is that? And I'm not defending it. I'm just saying this space has become complicated because you're doing crowd management. And you must have a situation where every one of those situations is isolated and properly investigated.
Reverend, let's address the elephant in the room.
Yes.
So last year, the church was heavily accused of taking a backseat. And like you said, the religious leaders, the reaction appeared to be slow and muted.
Yeah.
Well, historically, the church in Kenya has played a frontline role in Kenya's struggles from the 1990s, for some of us who remember. Many churches today seem to be compromised or co-opted. And the reason I say that is because the issues of churches having close ties with political leaders speak so loud, where you have offerings, donations, you've prepared platforms for some of these leaders to speak, and the current administration came through that platform. And a lot of the people who came out in support were actually from the church and believed this is the chosen one. But now, looking back, the backlash, is it also a question of wrong choices? And that's the reason why the church is a bit apprehensive on where to go and how to handle this situation. Because the Gen Z are saying the church is compromised. We don't even trust the church leaders. And like you said, some of you who are very outspoken, because you're not necessarily up there, your voices are not necessarily heard so loud and clear. Yeah.
Yes, the situation of the church is one of those, like juggling liver. You try hold this, it slips. Try hold this, it slides. So, and I'm not going to make any excuses for the church. We brought this regime into power. I think that needs to be said, and unapologetically so. At the time, we believed that this regime would deliver, and the church, by the time the church throws its weight behind a candidate, usually there are many, many consultations, many, many questions, many conversations, boardroom conversations. So there's due diligence done. And as you know, people are taken the way they present themselves. So up to the election, I don't think I can blame the church for that. Up to the election. What ensued after the election is perhaps something that then the church should have taken a back seat and had another conversation with itself and then made a decision quickly about what then ensued. Because, you can make one decision, but failure to review that decision is the biggest failure.
What would have been the change if that decision had been reviewed? Because here you are, by your own admission, that there was a position that was taken by the church
that is correct,
to throw its support behind President William Ruto
yes,
before the election.
That is
the
correct.
election happened, he became president. So are you essentially saying that it was clear at some point that perhaps a wrong decision was made? And what would have happened if a review came about that would have changed status quo?
Well, hypothetically for me, when you make a decision and it's not going well, you review the decision. You say, in light of what we are seeing, we would like to say the following things in review that we supported in good faith. What we are seeing is situations and tendencies that we do not agree with, and pick out those situations and be vocal about them. And so we would like to see this changed and would like to see this happen differently, and keep insisting. And I think, to their credit, there are some church leaders that have been consistent about that. It's just that because the church is this monolithic animal that has so many faces, when you say the church, when one side speaks and another keeps quiet and another speaks in the opposite direction, then the collective effect is compromised. All right? So, in my view, the same collective effort, and I really need to be fair to the church also and say there are leaders who opposed this regime from the beginning.
So it was
church
not
leaders.
one concerted...
It was not.
Okay, all right.
It was a majority of the church. It was not the whole of the church. Okay? It was a majority of the church. So the sides of the church that did not support the regime before it came to power feel vindicated, hence the confusion. They are telling the other leaders, we told you. The other leaders are saying, so now what do we do? Are we the same church or not? So those intra-conversations must be translated into one voice. Translating that into one voice has taken a lot of lobbying from people in my rank speaking upwards and saying, look, we are where we are, and we are the church. We cannot cry over what seems to be spilled, but we can remedy it. What are the remedies? Look at the remedies. Let's say this, let's speak this, let's take this position, and let's act as one body as much as we can. It is people like us speaking to people across the board in the church and coming together and saying, what is our message? What is our position? We're not going to, as a church really, we're not going to start attacking each other in public and say, you people supported, us people knew, so we did not. That's not how we operate. That's not how we get down. How we get down is we clean house. All right? We say, okay, this did not go very well, and it has given us a bad image.
So
now, how do we get back to where we are supposed to be as a church? And not just politically, because the church is an organization that covers every facet of life. But because what conversations we're having now are political, we must have a very, very clear message that is one. Now, achieving that is quite a task.
Conversations out there is that as well, as much as the church played an important role in putting the government in place, and now where we are and the slow pace at which the church took to respond to all these issues, there are those who push the idea or the agenda that the church should be apolitical, not supporting any side, so that in case of anything, they're able to speak at that point. And also the fact that now we are here. Are there meetings with government or any conversations happening with government because we are part of this government we put in place? Are there any conversations to remedy and change things? And if so, what's the progress? If not, why are we not meeting with government?
Okay. So, firstly, the slow response, I think I've explained that. And so where we are at is that there have been and there still are conversations. You remember at the height of Gen Z after 25th, there was a group of leaders that went to see the president. At that point, he was very, very open. And they went to see him, but it was scandalized. And I remember being invited to some media houses and being asked, why did you go? I said, I didn't go. But I know those who went, and I spoke to them. And the media asked me, so what did they say? I said, they basically took the Gen Z agenda and took it to the president and made demands. But that did not come through in the presser because they did not hold a presser. They just did a photo. So Optics, very bad. You
As
guys
they would.
went
Yeah.
and
As they
ate
would.
ugali.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Took a picture after.
So
yes.
and some of us were very clear when we spoke to the media that they went with a good message, they gave the wrong optics. And I dare say, in that meeting, everybody was supposed to go. Everybody, meaning the leaders of the church from across the divide, were invited to that meeting. There are those from NCCK who did not go because of the optics. So they may have scored highly in the eyes of the public, but do you lose platform of engagement? Was there a way that meeting should have been done better? Where you take, because that's really what you want. You want a situation where you have an open door with state.
Sure.
Okay? But you're not going with the agenda of state. You're going with the agenda of the people, because the church is with the people every day. You're going with the agenda of the people and saying, this is the agenda of the people. We insist that after this meeting, we each give a statement. You, head of state, give a statement. We, the church, will give a statement about what we have told you and what we want to hold you to account about. So my opinion, and it still remains my opinion, is that those meetings should be had and they should be held in public, and there should be accountability about what was said and what was agreed upon, so that the next time there's a cumulative effect. They say, last time we met on X date and we issued a statement, and we have a copy of it here, we had the following points of engagement and the following agreements. State was supposed to do A, B, C, D, E. We are here to review that position. And or to revisit, not necessarily review, to revisit in light of the time that has passed. We have had a subsequent meeting with state, and this has been done to our satisfaction. This and this has been done, but not to our satisfaction. We still hold on to our demand that this should be done, and this should be done, and this. And that's how you engage that space. But you cannot engage that space by going there, saying the right things, and then come out and take a photo and be quiet.
And keeping quiet.
That was a big blunder, and so that then scandalized that space.
That process. And thereafter, we heard a lot of things that we heard.
Yeah, but Reverend Tom, does that also speak to the lack of discernment then from the church's standpoint? Because when you are invited to that kind of space, already it's very clear. It sends a political message.
That is correct.
So when you're reduced to political influence, going to State House, I remember conversations around it, and then coming out without giving statements, like you're saying. The agenda that was discussed, like you rightly put, the agreements, were there even timelines? Why didn't they speak? And was it maybe deliberate, or was it lack of oversight?
I think for me, it was lack of vision, lack of sight, foresight. It was lack of foresight. Because you're in a politically volatile context and time, and really, at that point, speaking to the people and saying the right thing to the people is everything. And then you don't speak. Then you shoot yourself in the foot. So it was lack of foresight, and as you rightly said it was lack of discernment. We did not discern the moment for what it deserved. You didn't even have to make that statement in State House. Come out of State House, call a presser the next day, and say, you may have seen that we went. Yes, we went. Here is what we discussed. Here is what we agreed. Here are the timelines. That presser has never happened. So that is a big, big minus for that particular space. And it does not help that then there has now been a situation where people seem to be talking at each other between church and state. All right? The Roman Catholics have flat out refused to go and meet the president. I think that's a problem from where I sit. The NCCKs, some of them have refuse to go and meet the president.
Why?
I think that's a problem.
Why?
It's because
so
of
the two whys
because
here.
of this thing.
So why have they refused, and why do you think that this is a problem?
Because of perception.
Okay.
Because, coming out of that meeting, the church leaders were afraid to be seen to be dining. Because, you see, this is what the young people are saying. But I'm saying I do not agree with that perception. What there needs to be is continuous engagement, but engagement that can be held to account by the constituency we share. The church and the state share one constituency, which is why one cannot tell the other, get out.
Exactly.
We share the same constituency. We are joined at the hip. We care for the people. We work together to help the people. There are services which the church does, and plenty of them, in health, in education, which are government services, but which government recognizes that the church is coming in as a partner.
Indeed.
So this is why it is fallacious for anyone to say to the church, step out of politics.
Okay.
However, let me caution that the church should not engage itself in party politics. What it does need to engage itself in is politics, which is basically the policies that make the life of people better and improve the welfare of the masses.
Okay.
The church must be the voice of the voiceless and the champion of the downtrodden. That remains a hat we wear with honor and a badge we wear with pride. But if we start acting in ways that compromise that position, then in the face of the public, we lose credibility, we lose moral authority, we lose platform. So we must go back to structured engagement. I don't think that being afraid of meeting the president is the way to go. You cannot say, you are called and you refuse to go. That's not a nice thing to say.
Because of the perception that would come from
That
people.
is correct.
Absolutely.
But can't you manage that better? You say, nothing stops you from going, then going and saying, I went. This is what we discussed. This is what we agreed. This is my statement.
So
you basically told the public, I am acting as the church to help state, but also to help the people and improve our collective space. So you cannot refuse to go, but you also cannot go there and be quiet.
So if you graduate this conversation, I mean, we are no strangers to Jerusalem, and anybody who would be in this country for the last 1 year or so would recognize and acknowledge that indeed there are problems, which again, you've said, there are things that are not going right. It's clear. And one would assume that it's clear also to the president and his administration, and he says this on very many occasions, that they're doing everything they can to make things better and talks about progress made. However, there must be an acknowledgement of these issues. And so when these meetings are called, or when there is an invitation for discourse or dialogue with different parties, there must be a willingness to change certain things. There must be a fundamental willingness to even acknowledge that there is a problem. And if that doesn't happen, then all of these engagements, in my opinion, are exercises in futility. Because if you don't acknowledge that there is an issue and say, we see that different parties, that we can associate with different parties and engage with the different parties to make things better, there is no point in meeting. So one would ask then, is there a willingness, number one, to acknowledge that there are issues? Number two, to start to work on those issues with the different parties and say, let's see how we can fix this. Because what we see, protests on the 25th of June, protests again today, engagement over and over like this, just continues to exacerbate the situation. But if we don't deal with the issue, we're taking Panadol for a headache for which we need brain surgery.
Yeah. And the only way to bring meaningful change, meaningful, sustainable change, is through constant and consistent, meaningful dialogue between stakeholders. The church is a stakeholder. The young people are a stakeholder. I pride myself as being a pastor to Gen Zs. I spend a lot of time in high schools. In fact, 90% of my ministry time is spent in high schools. And I say to Gen Zs, for you to engage, you can't just be running the streets. Get yourselves leadership, Let your leadership be tested. One of the ways that the leadership will be tested is some will be bought. Let them go. Evolve leaders who cannot be bought and who will stand with your cause. But you must have leadership, because without leadership, you can't engage. You cannot just be running battles in the trenches. Even those who fought for independence had two wings. They had the militant wing that was running, the battle in the bush and wherever else it was being fought. But they had the intelligentsia, the people that were talking in the boardroom and saying, this is the face of what you see out there. This is our message, right? I ask, what is the message of the Gen Zs? I ask them, what is their message? What do they want? I know it's unemployment, but who is going to front that? If all that is happening is street work, and that's important, street work must happen, but they must create leadership that can come to the table and say, this is what we want. This is what we are saying in these protests. Boardroom engagement. And you cannot eschew boardroom engagement because you are afraid of being targeted or you are afraid of being compromised.
So you agree that governance happens in the boardroom, but revolution happens in the streets?
In both.
In both.
Actually, in both. Effective change comes from both engagements, not one. One just tires you. At the end of the day, you just get tired when you run the streets only. But you must have both, those that engage for you and speak for you and carry your cause and are married to your cause and cannot be compromised. Those end up being your leaders. But in the initial stages, you must be prepared that you'll have leadership casualties. Like they already have a few leadership casualties. And that's important. It's an important part of processing your leaders. So they must put out leaders and they must agree that these are our leaders. And then let state do what it does with those leaders. State will spy on them. State will prosecute them, persecute them, tempt them with money. They must be tested. They cannot, for crying out loud, Gen Zs cannot give us untested leaders. No, that's not right. That's not how the world goes. Leaders must go through a period of testing.
Reverend Tom, I think I'll disagree with you on one point here. When you talk about coming to the table, appointing leaders to come to the table, there's an element of having leadership that I agree with. But in terms of getting leaders to the table to speak to this administration on the issues that concern them, are we then saying, because when you look at the demonstrations from last year, what at a glance, looking at the demands from the finance bill, issues of taxation, issues of youth unemployment, addressing injustice issues. Now, a year later, we're still having the conversations of let's have this conversation about extrajudicial killings. Let's talk about abductions. All the core issues that affect the youth, they are known by the administration. The administration doesn't need to have these young people on the streets to know, okay, what are they saying? What is the pulse of the nation? Let's get some of their leaders, we sit and we discuss these issues. They already know what the issues are. They don't need to have meetings to discuss the same issues. And this is one of the things that the young people are angry about, because when they go to the streets, they are speaking in one voice. They're saying these are the issues we are protesting about. The administration knows. Why is it then necessary to have an administration that has a leadership, that has cabinet secretaries, that has PSs, that sits down to draw up a budget, that sits down to look at what are the key issues of each ministry, but yet you still need these young people to sit with you and tell you these are the problems we have? Are we then not lying to ourselves?
Well, from my little study about change and revolution and resistance and struggles, because this is a resistance, and it's a legitimate resistance. None has been productive if there was no legitimate representation that articulated what it is that